answering questions as you have them. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Millie will call out if there's any that we should answer during the presentation, but she'll also be answering them to you directly in the chat. You can also, we'll take some time at the end where you can ask questions if you'd like to as well. So today we're going to be talking about the real basics of the financial aid process. What exactly constitutes financial aid? What are the different types of aid? How do you apply for it? What is the cost of attendance at a school? What is the family contribution? What is financial need and how is it calculated? What to do if you have special or unusual circumstances that might not be covered in the financial aid forms. And then we'll leave you with some tips and some questions for you to ask financial aid offices as you're going through the process. So to start off, we're going to look at what does college actually cost. So looking at averages across the United States, at a 4-year private school, the average cost in the 24-25 academic year was about $62,000. For a 4-year public, that was $30,000 if you're in state and more like $50,000 if you were out of state. So for a lot of us who went to college, 20, in some cases 30 years ago, the changes have been pretty dramatic in the cost of college and how you afford and pay for college. 47% of bachelor's degree recipients from 4-year public schools did graduate with federal loan debt, averaging about $20,000 per student. About 9% had private loan debt, which is a little bit higher, the average amount that people borrow. But you see a smaller amount of students are doing that borrowing. 52% of bachelor's degree recipients from private nonprofit schools graduated with federal loan debt, and that was a little bit higher than public schools. It's about $22,500. 14% of the students graduating from private nonprofits had private loans, and they were borrowing an average of about $41,000 a year. And that can be a combination of student loans or parent loans. You can borrow as the parent, and the student can also borrow. So what is the financial aid? So financial aid is funding that you receive to help pay for educational costs. It is intended to assist in paying for college, to provide access and equity across the board. And these policies that schools have in place are going to be to allow a fair and equitable distribution of their limited resources. So the scariest form of financial aid that people is those loans. They are considered a form of financial aid, particularly the federal loans are considered a form of financial aid because students are eligible to borrow them even if they have no credit history at all and they do not need a cosigner, and they get a relatively favorable rate for someone who has no credit history and no cosigner. Some schools will include those in the financial aid package up front. Some schools do not include those as part of the financial aid package, so that's something that can vary. But loans are always an option that you have available to you to help finance education. The next form of financial aid is actually the work-study program. So that's where the Department of Education is paying a percentage of the student's wages and the employer is paying the other percentage of the student's wages. It's money that the student can earn over the course of the year to help fund their expenses. And it makes it much easier for universities and colleges to offer a lot of jobs to students because they don't have to pay the full freight of the student's wages. They split that cost with the Department of Education. And then lastly is the most favorable kind of financial aid, which is scholarships and grants. That is gift aid. You don't pay it back. It's available. There's both scholarships are typically awarded on a merit basis. So good grades, athletics, musical ability, things like that. Grants are need-based financial aid. So now we get a little bit deeper into this merit versus need-based. So different schools will have different policies on how they award their financial aid. Some schools are going to award aid solely based on merit. So it's really based on the students' grades, their accomplishments, their talents and aptitudes in other areas. It doesn't have a basis in the family's ability to pay. It is solely based on how much the school is trying to recruit the student. Need-based aid is going to be based on the family's ability to pay by assessing their financial situation in the information you provide in the financial aid forms. So that is based on a family's ability to contribute. It's not based on whether the parents are willing to contribute. And for most students who are so a student can't just say, I'm 18, I'm independent, you don't need my parents' information. It's still going to require parent information for most students. So early action and regular decision. These are 3 different admission programs. Early decision is when you apply early, but it's a binding offer. So if you apply early, the expectation is that if you are admitted, you will be attending. Early action is similar in that you apply early and find out early, but it is not binding. You get that information early, but you're not expected to necessarily attend and can still apply to other schools and compare offers. Regular decision is when you apply a little bit later. Usually the deadlines are like January 1st or something like that. And then you hear in March or April whether the student has been admitted. And that is when most schools are sending out their notifications. And so you'll get lots of different feedback from schools all at once at that time. Early decision can be great if the student is really laser focused on one school and knows that that's where they really want to be, and you've explored their financial aid program and you feel like this is something you can do. Then early decision is great because it gets you're able to lock in that spot early at a school where things may be more selective. But if your things really hinge heavily on the finances and you're not confident that the school is necessarily going to be able to support you the way you need, then early decision is not usually the best choice in that scenario. Early action gives you a lot of flexibility because you're not bound to anything, but you do get to know early whether you've been admitted and what your financial aid is going to be there. Regular decision gives you the most ability to compare other offers and to really talk to the different schools about their financial aid programs and see which one is going to best suit you. But you do lose out on some of those opportunities where spots get sort of snapped up in early decision and early action. So to apply for financial aid, you're going to want to check each college's website individually because different schools are going to have different requirements for financial aid and they're going to have different deadlines for financial aid. So pay close attention to the deadlines at the schools your child is applying to because those will vary from school to school. You want to make sure, and I should also say the deadlines will vary depending on when you're applying. So a student who's applying early decision is going to need to file their financial aid forms earlier than if they're applying a regular decision. You want to make sure you complete all the materials required by the schools. Almost every single school you apply to is going to require the FAFSA if you're seeking any need-based financial aid. Often it's required for families if you're applying for Merit Aid 2. Some schools will require it, and it's going to be required anytime you're seeking any federal loans. The CSS profile is a form that some schools use, but not all schools. It tends to be more private schools that are going to be using this. And it's a form through the College Board, the same group that does the SATs and ACTs. It's a little bit more detailed than the FAFSA, and it has its own methodology associated with it that's separate from the FAFSA. You also may be required to file an institutional document. Some schools have their own financial aid forms that they want you to complete, or additional forms that they need you to complete. And then some schools are going to require additional documentation in the form of your tax returns. Now, if you are the parent of a current senior and they're looking to go straight from high school into college, then you will be applying for financial aid using your 2024 tax returns and income. It's always a bit behind. So the 2026-2027 academic year will be based on 2024 tax information. That's true for both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. And so you'll also just want to follow up with your schools. If they have systems in place where you can track your documents, make sure everything's complete. And make sure both you and the student are watching out for emails from the school, because sometimes things will look like you're complete, and then when we get in there and start going through all the documentation, we'll realize we're missing something or we need something else. So be on the lookout for schools contacting you for more information during the financial aid process as well. So the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. This is the federal form. It is free. So if you're at a website that is asking you to pay for the FAFSA, you are not at the right website. It's at studentaid.gov is where you access the FAFSA. And that is used to determine your eligibility for the Pell Grant, the federal SEOG, which is the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, federal work study, and also for those federal direct loans. And in situations where the parents are divorced or separated, it is the parent who provides the most financial support who completes the FAFSA, not necessarily who the student lives with most. And one thing I should mention with the FAFSA as well is that it's only one parent who completes the FAFSA in situations where the parents are divorced or separated. If the parents are married, then it'll be one FAFSA for the household. If the parents are divorced or separated, then it will only be one of the parents who's reporting, and it should be the parent who provides the most financial support. So in the 2024-2025 academic year, there were some big changes to the FAFSA. So the FAFSA for this year is actually already available. They said it would be October 1st, and they actually were early this year, which has not been the case the last 2 years. So we're really excited to see that it's available and seems to be working so far. There was a change made in the 2024-2025 academic year. I've already mentioned this a little bit, but it used to be the parent who the student lived with more who reported on the FAFSA. That is no longer the case. It is if the parents are divorced or separated, it's the parent who provides the most financial support.
So we have a question that I think will benefit everybody. And the question is, what if the parents are divorced and provide the same amount of support? Who would be the parent of record?
Then typically in that scenario, I would go to the studentaid.gov. They have a little calculator type tool where you put in information and it will tell you which parent should report based on your situation.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah. So I would use that tool in any case where you're not sure who should be reporting. Use that tool to figure out who is the best person to report. And so everyone who contributes to the FAFSA, which would be the parent and the students, the student usually initiates the FAFSA and then invites their parents to contribute their information. But every contributor must have an FSA ID, which you get at studentaid.gov. And every contributor must provide consent for their tax data to be pulled directly from the IRS database into the FAFSA form. That used to be an optional thing. It is no longer optional anymore. You are required to go through that process. And if any of the contributors fails to consent to it, it leads to an incomplete FAFSA and you can't award aid based on that. So it's a very important piece. The EFC, which was the estimated family contribution, is no longer what the federal government uses. It's now called the SAI, Student Aid Index. So that's when you finish the FAFSA, you'll get a number at the end and it'll say your SAI is X number of dollars. And that is the calculation that the Department of Education is using to determine what your eligibility is for these federal aid sources. And the FAFSA calculation no longer allows for an adjustment for multiple children in college. That's not to say schools don't make an allowance for multiple children in college, but the FAFSA calculation does not. You also are now required to report all businesses and farms. Previously, there was a threshold under which you did not need to report those. But if you are a business owner, that does need to be reported as an asset if there are assets associated with it. And they increase the number of schools that can be listed on the FAFSA up to 20, which makes it a lot easier. You don't have to call around to schools and take schools off of your FAFSA anymore. So the CSS profile is not required by everyone, but is required by some private schools. It is not free. It is $25 to file the CSS profile and send it to one school. And then for each additional school you're sending it to, it's a $16 charge. If your adjusted gross income that you're reporting in the form for your 2024 tax year is $100,000 or less, then the fee to file the CSS profile is waived. So they do have fee waivers available for families who meet that threshold. It will automatically at the end just not require you to pay if you meet that. So this is used primarily to determine whether you qualify for institutional funding. So the FAFSA is for federal funding. The CSS profile determines whether you qualify for the funding from the school directly. So it looks at both households. If the parents are divorced or separated, you will file one form for the first household and a second form for the other household. The CSS profile breaks it out as the custodial parent versus the non-custodial parent. But we recognize that it's not always that way because it's going to mirror the FAFSA, where the parent who's filing as the custodial parent is the parent who filed the FAFSA. And then the other parent will report as the non-custodial parent. But the CSS profile takes into consideration both biological or adoptive parents equally. So if you have unusual family circumstances that aren't really covered in the forms that you're filling out, you'll want to reach out to those financial aid offices and have a conversation with them about your circumstances. If you're applying mostly to schools that use the CSS profile, it has a section towards the end of the form where you can free write in information about your specific situation that you want to share with the financial aid office. And so that's a great way to start the conversation. If the schools don't use the CSS profile, they can still take into consideration additional information that you provide. You'll just need to be more proactive about getting it out there to them. With the non-custodial parent being required on the CSS profile, there are also waivers available if there's a situation where that parent is not available or able to complete the form. Generally, it requires a breakdown of the relationship between the parent and the student or an inability to contact them in some way. A parent simply being unwilling to participate in the process is not necessarily grounds to waive them from the financial aid process. Because again, need-based financial aid is based on a parent's ability to pay, not their willingness to pay. But each school is going to have their own process for waiving parents and their own criteria for what they allow and don't allow. So if you have questions about that, you're going to want to reach out to the schools your student is interested in directly and have a conversation with them about what their criteria is and what information they need to see in order to make a determination. If you complete the CSS profile and indicate that you have no contact with your non-custodial parent, typically schools are going to reach out and ask for more information beyond that. But it will take away the requirement to fill out the second part of the non-custodial parent profile. That will get waived if you indicate no contact, but schools may still reach out and want more information about that. So once you've actually applied, what is the process that's going to happen? So the first thing that schools need to do is determine what does it cost to go here. So they're going to come up with the tuition and fees, the housing and food allowance, books and supplies, transportation, and then usually make an allowance for miscellaneous or personal expenses. All of that together is what will be the cost of attendance that we are trying to determine if the family can meet. So it's not all things that are billed by the university. At a residential university like Wesleyan, tuition, fees, housing, and food are all billed by Wesleyan. The rest of that is out-of-pocket expenses for the family. At some schools, the student may be not on a meal plan, or maybe living at home and doesn't have housing expenses, or maybe living in an apartment and not be billed by the school for their housing expenses, but they will still be included in that cost of attendance. So then we use the forms that you've submitted, the FAFSA, the CSS profile, to determine a family's ability to pay for educational expenses. So federal aid is calculated from the FAFSA, institutional aid is calculated from both the CSS profile and the FAFSA. There may be a review of tax returns or other additional documents. It does look at both income and assets. It includes both your taxable income, so looking at your adjusted gross income on your tax return, but it also includes untaxed sources of income that might not necessarily be included in your tax return. Assets that might be include home equity, additional real estate that families might own, business equity, cash savings, and investments that are not in designated retirement accounts. So money that you already have saved in retirement is not reported as an asset on either the FAFSA or the CSS profile. The CSS profile does ask the question, but it's not used in the calculation of a family's ability to pay. It's generally just used as an informational point for schools to get a better sense of the overall financial health of a family for when we're considering additional circumstances. So the student contribution is calculated based on the information from the FAFSA and the CSS profile. If the student, some students actually have relatively high earnings, some are working as teenagers. And so there may be calculations based on that. Some schools also do a set student contribution of what they expect the student to earn over the summer, and it's the same for all students. So when we talk about demonstrated financial need, what that is the cost of attendance minus the calculated family contribution, the parent contribution plus the student contribution. That is what is your demonstrated financial need. And so what the school calculates to be your demonstrated financial need may be different from what you feel your financial need is. And in that case, that's a conversation you want to have with the school. And it may mean that the school is not a good match for you if you're far apart in terms of how you're thinking about these finances. But different institutions are going to calculate differently. So you may, if the student can apply to 15 different schools, get admitted to all of them, and have 15 very different financial aid offers. There are schools that do things very similarly, and so you will see very similar financial aid packages from similar schools. But you can see a pretty wide range because not all schools meet financial need. So that's something that you want to be asking the schools that you're applying to or checking on their websites. Do they meet full need? Because there are some schools who will look at it and say, this family needs $50,000 to attend. We can give them 30. They'll have to figure out the rest. And then there are schools that will say this family has $50,000 of demonstrated financial need. They will get $50,000 of aid. So you want to know whether the school is meeting full need. But need is first met with either loans or a work study package. So some schools will package loans, student loans up front. Some schools also package parent loans up front as part of the financial aid package. So you want to look at it carefully when you're reviewing the letters you're getting back from schools and not look at just what are you expected to pay, but what are the sources of aid that they're giving you. Obviously, grants and scholarships are the most favorable form of aid that you can get. And then what are they expecting the student to work for work study? Are they expecting you to take out loans right off the bat, or are loans just something you can add on as a way to help finance your parent contribution? But so first into the package will be either loans or work study. And then the remaining financial need is met with grants and scholarship support. This could be federal sources like the Pell or the SEOG, state scholarships, and it can also be the institutional aid from the school itself. So you take the cost of attendance and subtract out the family contribution, and that gives you your financial need. And from that, you subtract out the self-help, which is the student's contribution, the loan and the work study. And then that is where the scholarship would come in to fill the need if the school meets full need. But again, be wary of schools that have a gap and make sure if they do have a gap in their funding where you're expected to pick that up, you understand what you're signing up for and you feel comfortable with what they're asking you to pay. So this is an example of a financial aid letter. This is a Wesleyan financial aid letter, but it follows a very similar format as other schools use. So this one first breaks down the cost of attendance. So we have tuition and fees, housing and meals. Those are the direct costs that are billed by the school. And then we have the indirect expenses, books and supplies, travel, And that brings us to the total cost of attendance for a year at the school. And then you have the financial aid award, which is the grants and scholarships. And then there's no loans included in this one. There is work study of $2,750 included. So the total financial aid is the scholarship plus that work study, which we will see matches up with the family's total need, their cost of attendance there. So generally, you would want your aid to equal or exceed your need. In cases where it would exceed your need would be cases where you're receiving merit aid as well. In a need-based only program, the aid will only ever equal your need. It won't exceed it. But with schools that are providing merit aid, it can exceed what your calculated need is. So again, pay close attention, not to just how much money you're getting from the school, but how much you're expected to actually pay. Because you may be getting a lot of money from a school that is a very expensive school, and you're expected to pay more than at another school that is less expensive, but is giving you a lower scholarship. So pay attention to the actual amount you're going to be expected to pay, and then also pay attention to those sources of aid to make sure if there are loans that you understand that and you're comfortable taking those on. And then the last thing I want to show you is that a lot of financial aid awards will have notes from your financial aid counselor or something similar. Look for these kinds of messages. They will give you some general information about your financial aid package. There may also be information that is very specific to you and your situation. So look at those and make sure you understand all the information there, because some of that can be really helpful. So again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but if there is additional information that you want to communicate to these financial aid offices that's not covered in the forms, make sure you're contacting the financial aid offices and providing that information to them. An example would be if there's been a change in the family's financial situation since the application was submitted or since the 2024 tax year. Other things that are warrant a change in the financial aid can be a loss of income, extraordinary medical expenses, financial support to other family members like grandparents. But keep in mind that a lot of schools aren't going to match other schools' financial aid, especially if it's a need-based calculation. There's typically not a mechanism for matching another school's offer. Merit scholarships, you see that more, where you can compare two merit scholarships and let one know that another school is offering you more. But with need-based scholarships, if the financial aid is going to change, there needs to be a change in the numbers in the calculation. So a change to the income or the assets as they were reported, or a special circumstance that wasn't originally considered. So if you have settled on a school and you've gotten the financial aid package and you want to move forward with it, but you don't feel like you can just pay that parent contribution in the given year, there are some financing options available. Loans can be taken out in both the parent's name and the student's name. It can be an and or an or. So the student does have the ability to borrow federal loans through the federal government. The student can also get a private loan if they choose. They do typically need a cosigner, though, because they won't have the credit history to support the amount of debt they'd be looking to take on. But parents also have the options to borrow to cover the parent contribution. The federal government offers a loan called the Parent Plus loan. And the alternative to that would be going with a private educational loan. The Plus loan is a good option in that it's easier to qualify for. It doesn't have as high a credit bar to meet in order to qualify for that loan. But you don't get a benefit if you have really strong credit in terms of the interest rate. The interest rate is set for all borrowers. It's set by congressional vote each June. And so while it's easier to qualify for, you don't get the benefit of really great interest rate offers if you have really strong credit. Private loans are going to look more in depth at your credit and your ability to repay that loan. And if you do have strong credit, you may see that you're able to get a more favorable interest rate. There's also monthly payment plans that schools will offer that allow you to pay in installments. Otherwise, schools typically bill fall and then spring, or if they're on trimesters, at each trimester. But you can break that up into smaller payments instead of just paying twice a year. And you can do a combination of those things. Take out a loan for, say, $10,000 and then do the rest in a payment plan where you're paying monthly. But each school is going to have a little bit of different policies regarding payment plans. So check out the resources that they have to offer you. But research your options and research those interest rates and make sure that if you are borrowing, that you are borrowing at a level you feel comfortable with, and that you are researching all the options that are available on both the parent and student side and making informed choices about that. So some other tips to think of. Every school is federally mandated to have a net price calculator on their website that will help calculate what you can would it be expected to pay at that school. Some schools have really detailed net price calculators that get you a very accurate result. Some are more general and give you just a sense or a range of where you might fall in terms of financial aid, but every school will have something to give you a sense. So don't just write off more expensive schools because of the total cost of attendance. You really want to use that net price calculator first and think about what that school is going to cost you, not just what the sticker price is. Because often schools that have those higher costs of attendance have stronger financial aid programs and are giving more need-based aid. So don't write off schools with the high sticker price right away. First, check out the net price calculator and see what their aid program might do for you. Pay attention to and meet all those deadlines. Some schools are very flexible about their deadlines. Some schools, if you don't make the deadline, you don't get aid. So make sure you are paying close attention to that, both as you go through the admissions process and in subsequent years. You often, for need-based financial aid, you're reapplying every year with more recent income information. So you want to be paying attention to those deadlines year over year to make sure you stay qualified for the financial aid you need. And then communicate with the financial aid offices if you have questions or issues during the financial aid process. A lot of the work that we do in the financial aid office is working with prospective students and their families. So you don't have to wait until you're admitted to have these kinds of conversations with schools. We can talk you through a lot of stuff in advance and answer questions for you and help troubleshoot on the forms at times. So reach out to financial aid offices and use them as the resource that they are. They're a resource to you while your student is in college, but they're also a resource to you now while your student is going through this process. So some suggestions for things to talk to the different colleges and universities about. Are their admissions decisions need blind? Which means, are their admissions department taking into consideration how much it would cost to bring the student to campus? Some schools don't factor that in at all and have a flexible budget to spend. Some schools have a very fixed budget on what they can spend for financial aid, and so are tracking that as they go through the admissions process and considering how much each student will need in terms of financial aid and letting that impact the decision as to whether or not to admit them. So that's an important question to ask and know about these schools. And then I think the most important thing is, what kind of aid are they providing? Is it merit? Is it need-based? Or is it some combination? Because that will really inform what kind of forms you need to do for them and what kind of conversations you're going to have with them after you get a financial aid package. Do they meet full demonstrated need? If they're going to leave gaps in the financial aid, that's something you definitely want to know up front. What does the self-help look like? Do they package loans for the students? How much work study do they expect students to complete? What do they expect students to earn over the summer? And what does that look like over 4 years? Whether the financial aid that they're offering is set for 4 years or whether it changes from year to year, whether there are circumstances that can impact the financial aid, like grades, if the student needs to maintain a certain GPA in order to retain their scholarship. It's also good to talk to them about what your options are if your family circumstances change. If there's a job loss, if there's a major medical emergency that uses up a chunk of savings, what flexibility do they have to work with you on that? And then another really important thing is, how do scholarships from outside of the college or university impact your financial aid? For need-based institutions, there are federal regulations around how outside scholarships can be used. So while they're a great way to supplement the financial aid that you're receiving, at strictly need-based schools, they have some limits to them. Schools that leave you with a gap in the packaging where they don't meet full need, they can be used much more liberally. And schools that are only providing merit aid, you get a lot more flexibility with outside scholarships. But understanding what their policy is around that can inform just how much time your student is going to invest in chasing down these scholarship opportunities. So we'll take some time now for people to ask questions if you have them. I've seen the chat's been really active. That's fantastic. You can also reach out to us directly at Wesleyan. Our contact information is up here. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, whether you're going to be an applicant at Wesleyan or not. I do not care. If you have financial aid questions, I'm available to help. So if we have questions, or Millie, if you have any questions you want to call out to be answered by the group, let me know.
I think all the questions have been answered already, hopefully to the satisfaction of those who asked it. But if you still have any other questions, feel free to let us know so that we can discuss it.
And thanks so much, everyone, for coming out. It's not the most exciting topic, but it is an important one as you go through this process. So again, ask lots of questions. That's what the financial aid offices are there for. They're there to support students through the process from start to finish. So